Hello friends, I am Shelly Clough and today we are going to learn how to paint these cute watercolor bookmarks. These are one of my favorite things to do with watercolors, so we're going to walk through some fundamentals of watercolor florals and then I will show you how I turn them into these fun bookmarks. So I will walk you through our supplies and we'll go ahead and dive in. Okay, so for supplies, I obviously have my palette here with my Winsor & Newton paints in it. I have a couple of watercolor brushes. I want to have a size 4, a size 6. I may also use a larger one as well, like a size 10. And I'm also going to be using this micron pen. I like the 01 size, also their 005 size. I'm going to use this Canson XL watercolor paper. I'm also going to be using a little paper trimmer. I have some twine for the little tassels on our bookmarks. I have a hole punch, and I also have a little corner punch to make the cute little corners on the bookmarks as well. So those are going to be the supplies that we're going to use today, and now we're going to dive in and paint some flowers. Okay, so I've got my paper ready to go. I also forgot to tell you I do have water, a paper towel on my desktop as well, in case you didn't know. I am going to show first how to paint a few florals and then sort of how to arrange a composition that will work for some bookmarks. So first thing I'm going to do is take my large brush. I'm going to go with this size 10. This is a Princeton Neptune brush, and I'm going to just, the first type of flower I'm going to show you is what I call a 5-petaled flower. It's just a really simple, basic way, and I love this color here. This is quinacridone magenta. It's a very vibrant, kind of purpley pink color, and I just want to get a pretty good puddle of that going. And I think I'm not going to mix it with anything. I'm just going to stick with this straight quinacridone magenta. And I'm going to pick up some of that on my brush, start kind of in the middle of my paper here, and for a 5-petaled flower, I like to make 5 little marks. And sometimes I feel like spacing out the petals can be the hardest part. And so I start with sort of this star shape, or I like to picture a little person with a head and 2 arms and 2 legs kind of doing a little jump. And once I have those help me space out my petals, I'm going to add a little water to my brush and then come in and spread that paint out. And what I'm making here is sort of some fan shapes. I'm going to leave little bits of white out as I fill this in. It helps create a little bit of shape on my petals. Just going to fill those in, and I don't need them all to be the same. They're kind of like rounded triangles, so you'll notice I'm making the edge a little bit flat. It's not a round oval shape. It's a little flatter, or even with some bends in it to kind of give some texture to my petals. And I like leaving just a little bit of white space. Some of my petals here can touch, but I do want to leave a little bit of space in between the petals. Helps just carve out some shape there and make sure it doesn't look like a blob. And then I'm also, you'll notice I'm leaving this bit of white space in the center. I want to make sure I leave a little bit there because that also helps anchor the shape. If you lose and you fill in that white space, it will look kind of like a blob. That's a common mistake that I see happen. So now I'm going to do another one of those flowers, but I'm going to change up the tone a little bit. So I'm going to add some opera rose to this pink. Opera rose is like a bright fluorescent kind of pink. And I'm also going to add a little bit of lemon yellow, which is kind of this lemony looking yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of that to get me more of a coral tone. I want it to be similar to my first flower, but different enough to sort of shake things up. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go nearby to this first flower again, make my little person with heads and arms and little legs, and then I'm going to bring those petals out. And with watercolor, one of the trickiest parts is keeping control of your water and figuring out how much water is the right amount. Generally with watercolor, you want your paper to be shiny. That's how you know it's wet enough, is when the paper's shiny. I'm actually going to let these two kind of connect a bit. You want it to be a little bit shiny, but you don't really want puddles. But these kind of florals, it's actually fine to have some puddles. because this is going to be sort of a loose and playful project. And it's okay if we have some funny lines and, you know, color bleeds happening. We're going to work with all of that. So while those are drying, I'm going to continue to build out some of my florals. And when I go to do bookmarks, what I'm trying to do is fill up a lot of my page, get lots of colors going on, and a few different shapes happening. So like this bookmark here is a good example where I've got, you know, this is a 5-petaled flower, and then I've got a mix of some other florals and greenery. So I'm going to try to build in something kind of like that. So I'm going to show you another one of my favorite kind of flowers. It's a really easy starter flower. I like to start with the center of a flower, and I will just use kind of a yellow tone for that. This has cadmium yellow, a little bit of cadmium red. I'm going to come over here, kind of make a little trio. I'm going to use a process called scumbling to make about a nickel-sized shape here. Scumbling is essentially dancing your brush around, leaving little bits of white space, trying to create sort of a textured look. Okay, so that is this is going to be the center of a flower. And I'm going to give my brush a good rinse and pick another color that I'm going to do for this. And so when I'm picking colors, I want to try to make colors cooperate well with each other. So because I already have pink and kind of a coral tone, I think I'm going to go a little bit more orange. So I'm going to get quinacridone magenta again, and then more of the lemon yellow. So that way there's still some harmony, but it is changing things up a little bit. So I'm going to do more of this lemon yellow. So I've got kind of an orangey tone there, but it's going to look similar to the other colors I have. So for this flower, I create that center, and then what I will do is I'm going to make almost an M shape with my brush. So watch what I do here. I'm going to come up and then come back again, and then again. And then while that's still wet, I'm just going to tap a little extra color near the center there. And then I'm going to do that again. So notice it's like a 3-bumped M where the bumps get smaller as you go around. And I'm just going to rotate my paper and do that again. I'm going to be careful not to paint over what I've already painted, but sort of paint around it. So I'm going to do my loop up, kind of come down, do my other bumps, and then just carefully fill that part in right there. And then I'm going to do one more of those, just making sure I have enough of this color here. I'm not always really careful about keeping my paint colors clean, but with yellows, I am. I don't like to get other colors in my yellows because yellows I feel like get tainted easily. Okay, so there's more of this orange. Hold on, every time I feel like I've got it just right, it runs away from me. Does that ever happen to you? Okay, there's my last color. I'm going to do another big lump and kind of a little one, maybe a little baby petal right there, and just tap some color in here towards the center. And again, see how I've left a little bit of a ring around the center of this flower? This one, I feel like this needs to be a little bigger here. I'm just going to build that one out a little bit. It's kind of a little playful flower. And as I work this around the center, I'm just going to make a few little lines sort of connecting this to the center, so it looks like the petals are attached, and it helps concentrate some color there. So let's go ahead and do a couple of those. I'm going to get this yellow color again. I'm going to do one over here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, so that center of my flower, again, I'm just scumbling the center of it. And then I'm going to get kind of that orangey tone again. And a lot of these flowers we are going to go through and do a second layer on once they're dry. So they're not totally done yet. If they look a little simple or boring to you, that's okay, because they're not done. They're in their teenager phase. They're not quite done growing. And we're going to finish them up. So I've got more of that orange color, and I'm just going to fill in these petals here. Really, I'm just trying to create variety in the height of these petals and kind of give them a lot of movement so they look kind of fun and fluffy, and then just dropping a little extra color down there at the base. I'm just going to go in with that quinacridone magenta, drop a little extra color in here, and let that dry, let that do its thing. Okay, I'm going to do, now I'm going to do a few what I call filler flowers to help eat up some of this white space that we have on our paper. So one of my favorite I have a few different filler flowers that I like to do. And we're going to do one of them as like a really soft pink color. So I've got that opera rose color still. I'm going to do that, a little bit quinacridone, and I'm going to water that down. And I'm going to add just a little bit of burnt sienna to it. And that is going to mellow the pink out just enough to where it doesn't feel so in your face. It's going to feel less artificial. And I call these flowers a zigzag flower. So I'm going to build some over here. And essentially, I'm just making like a scratchy little ball. I'm zigzagging my brush around and kind of working around an imaginary center. Almost they're like a little asterisk or a star shape. And I try not to make it perfect all the way around. I like to have some breaks in it, and it just seems to help with some visual interest there. Got that one, and I'm going to do one more kind of up over here. And then while those are still kind of wet, I'm going to take just quinacridone magenta straight from the pan, tap a couple little drops in the center, and see how you get that fun gradient happening. Okay, another fun one to do is really just kind of some blobs. We're going to call them blobs. The thing with watercolors, it can be very forgiving, and we can just have fun with it. So I'm going to take some yellow here, and I'm going to come over in this region and just make some blobs, kind of some big chunks of color with this yellow. And before I get too far, I'm going to grab a little bit of that quinacridone color and drop a little bit of it in. That was kind of strong. I don't want to do quite that much. So I'm just going to take a really watered down magenta and drop it on some of those blobs, and it gives them a little bit of shape. I'm actually going to try a little bit of opera rose in there too. Do that little bit of super pink. It's not too much. Opera rose, you have to be really careful because it's beautiful, but it can overwhelm your painting really quickly because it's such a strong color, and you just really don't find that color naturally occurring very often. So, and then I'm just going to intensify some of this yellow a bit. It's all very wet, so I'm just sort of dancing my brush around, trying not to think too hard, putting some bits of color down. And so there is some more little filler that we've done. Now, while we wait for those to dry, our first flowers are dry, and so we can go and add a second layer onto those. So for this first 5-petaled flower, I am going to go in with straight quinacridone magenta, and I'm going to do a shape kind of like these little zigzag flowers I did. So I'm going to start in the middle, and I just want to make little zigzags from the center of this flower. See how you do just a little bit of that, and it's created a whole lot of shape. You can do kind of a couple little extra marks that mimic the shape of the whole petal. And then I'm going to do the same thing on that next flower. Just a darker version of whatever I did the first time. Just these little zigzags. And it just helps to anchor the center of the flower and define that shape a little further. See how I'm taking that and just sort of pulling out the shape of the leaves a little bit more. And then on this swooshy flower, what should we call it? Should we call it the swooshy flower? I am going to, again, mimic that same shape, but in a deeper tone. So I'm going to go in with a pretty good sized petal of that quinacridone magenta, and then add quite a bit of the lemon yellow, so I have a nice strong orangey tone to work with. And add a little bit of water to that. And then I'm just going to mimic the same shapes I did that first time. I'm just doing a little portion of the initial petals, kind of mimicking the same movements of the petals. And all of this, we're still in the teenage phase. It's not done yet. It's gonna all work in the end. And I'm also gonna deepen the center of that flower as well. So I'm going to do that with a little bit of brown mixed with yellow. So I'm using burnt umber and taking it in with this yellow I've already got mixed up. And I'm gonna tap that in kind of the bottom left portion of this flower here. So covering just a little bit of the same area I did before. And then with a clean, damp brush, I'm just going to tap some of that color so the marks are a little bit softer. Okay. Now that these ones are starting to dry, I want to add little flicks of a stem to those. So I'm going to take one of my favorite greens. This is a mixture of Viridian green, which is a very pretty but very vibrant turquoise green. And if you use this color straight in your paintings, it will look very much like graphics on a computer or something. It's not going to look very realistic because it's so saturated. So what I do to tone that down is I add burnt umber, which is a brown color. And it makes it more of a pretty olive tone, which is a lot more sort of true to life of a green. So I'll just sort of tinker between those two. I tend to find that if it looks a little more brown than I think it should be when it's still in the pan, then it's a good color. If it still looks kind of vibrant in the pan, it's generally too vibrant for the paper. But I'm going to take some of that green and just make little flicks like this for these little flowers that I have coming out over here. And then I'm going to add some greenery. And I like to add stems. A lot of these bookmarks, I find that it's pretty when you can capture a part that has some leaves on it, like here. And this one here, it's fun to capture some leaves. So I like to add greenery when I'm getting ready to make bookmarks. So I will, first I'm going to make a stem. And then I am going to use this stroke where we press down and we drag and we lift until we get a little point. I'm going to do the same thing. So I start with light pressure, I press harder, and then I lift until I come back to a point. And it can be tricky the first several times you do it, but it's a great stroke to practice if you're wanting to get better at flowers and leaves and things like that. And then you can start to add little wiggles and bends to that stroke as well and get a little character to your leaves. So I'm just going to do a couple sets of leaves around this painting. So I've got more of that green picked up. I'm going to come over here, do kind of a leaf there. I like to leave just a little streak of white in my leaves. I find it helps them have a little bit of shape. And over here, again, you can see that stroke that I use where you have light pressure and then heavier pressure. It gets darker again. I like to work in trios with my leaves, so I'm going to bring some out over here. Come out like that. One of the keys to really nice stems is making sure that line is really thin. And if it's thin, it really helps your leaves look realistic. And then I like to make sure it's not too thick right where the leaves are kind of attaching to the stem. And then a nice point on the leaves also helps that shape kind of come to life. And I'm just going to kind of add a little color, make sure the base of these leaves have some depth. Okay, we are getting there. Now for these 5-petaled flowers in the center, I'm going to add one more bit of detail to those to help them come to life. I'm going to use a smaller brush for this. This is a size 4, and I'm actually going to go into this color called Payne's Gray, and it's a pretty dark tone. I'm going to add a little bit of indigo as well. And what I'm going to do is in the very center here, make some little tiny flicks. And then add some little dots. They're kind of like little stamens coming out of our flower. So just some little straight lines with dots around the end. Okay, now let's add a few more things to sort of fill out this arrangement, and then we can get ready to chop it up. So one of the things that I would like to add are some more fun little flowers. So another filler flower that I like is, you can actually make it as if it's a white flower. And to do that, I'm going to take this indigo color, which is like a grayish blue, and I'm going to water it down a lot. And actually, while I'm getting things ready, so I'm going to mix that color, I'm also going to mix more of that green color that I've been using so that I have it ready to go, because this is going to be a wet on wet process, and I want to have my paints all ready to go so that things aren't drying while I'm wanting to work still. Okay, so I've got my colors kind of ready to go, and I'm going to take that super light gray. I'm going to build some filler flowers over here. So for this flower, I just make, it's almost like a hoof shape or something, or a U, just a little bit. Sometimes I'll make more of a, like 3 little strokes, like it's a W, little dinosaur claw, whatever shape helps you figure it out. And try not to think too much about them. I'm just trying to have a little bit of separation. Okay, so there's some little florals, and then while they're still wet, I'm going to take that green color and tap it at the base, make these little stems coming down. See how when you tap it while it's still wet, you get a little bit of that green that seeps into the white, and it helps to draw out that shape a little bit more. Now I also like to do kind of a variety of greenery. So what I will do is pick a different shade of green. So I will usually go a little bit lighter and more yellow. So if I stick with the same viridian green and brown, and then try to add a little bit of yellow to that. So I'm going to go into this lemon yellow and add that in. Add a little more brown, a little more yellow. I'm just sort of playing until I get like a softer green that's going to be a contrast against the green that's already on my paper. So kind of starting to get there, and I want it nice and watery. I want this one to be more subtle. So that's a pretty good green. And with greenery, you don't have to have everything be a distinct shape. Sometimes the best greenery are just some marks. See that? I'm just sort of adding some little strokes of color. It's almost little lines, like they're blades of grass or something. You can do some that are thicker, some that are thinner. And what I can also do is, see how I have these little chunks of white space in here? I want to fill that in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same motion, the scumbling motion, but a little bit bigger. So with this green color, I'm just going to work all in here, being careful not to go over what I've already painted, but just making blobs of greenery. And leaving little bits of white space. And what that's doing is it's giving the impression of, you know, other greenery behind these flowers. It's sort of filling in the void so they don't look like they're floating so much. And then I'll take some of that motion, kind of come outward with it a little bit, just a little dots and dashes here. See how that's kind of, it's starting to come to life. We trusted the process and it's returning the favor. Now I'm going to take just a little bit deeper tone of that and drop a couple little bits in there just to get some variation in that green. So some of this is still wet, it's blending really nicely. Some of it, I'm just taking that same green and layering a little on top of those first strokes I did to give some extra dimension. So this part here where it was dry, I just have a damp brush and I'm going to wiggle that color around a little bit. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about things. I will add, I think I'm going to add a little bit more foliage in a blue color. That's kind of one of my favorite tricks, is to add a little bit of blue. Kind of a gray blue tends to work in an arrangement like this. So I'm going to go in with this indigo color and get that built up. And I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue as well. And I don't want it to be too dark, so I am adding a pretty good amount of water. And then with this, I'm just going to make a couple kind of bigger leaves with some wiggle to them. This is kind of like flower arranging, you know, I'm just finding little spots that need something and dropping some color there. And a lot of these marks, you know, they're not precise, they're just placeholders. They're just giving the impression of some greenery. Okay, and I'm going to do just a little blue in here as well to kind of keep things cohesive. We're just having fun, just dancing the brush around. Okay, and then I'm going to do one more batch of these little pink flowers kind of down over here just to maximize some of the space on my paper. And I'm going to go back to this medium brush, size 6. And again, that was quinacridone magenta, but kind of watered down. We added some opera rose and a little bit of burnt sienna. Kind of mellowed out a bit. And I'm just going to go down over here and add some of those. I've got this kind of zigzag shape. I'm just scratching my brush back and forth. And I'll have some look like they're peeking out from behind some of these other plants. Just a little bit of that color kind of splashing in here. And then again, while they're wet, just taking that straight quinacridone and tapping it in the center of those flowers so you get a nice little gradient going. I'm going to do one more like right here. Okay. Then remember we did our little grain stems connecting those flowers, so I'm just going to do a few little flicks. These make it look like they're talking to the rest of the arrangement. And these ones, my center is a little bit faded now that it's dried. That's something watercolor tends to do, is get lighter as it dries. And so I'm just going to go in and make a couple little marks again in the center, just some little dots kind of to bring back the center of those flowers. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about this layout, and now I know this might feel pretty, or maybe you don't feel like yours is pretty, but if you don't, be comforted because we're just going to chop it up anyway. But what I'm going to do is let this completely dry, and then I'm going to show you how to add some pen embellishments. Oh, actually, no, yeah, I'll show you how to add some embellishments with this micron pen. Okay, now that my painting is all dry, what I like to do for some of my paintings is to add a little bit to my paintings, to these bookmarks in pen. I like to go through and outline some of these florals, and it can be a really great tool, especially for beginners, because it helps draw out some dimension that may have been lacking in your initial painting. So I'm going to start and do some outlining on these flowers. I'm just going to grab the petal shapes that I painted. I'm going to try not to think too hard. I outline the petal and then I do a little stroke up through the middle. Outline the petal, a little stroke up. And it's okay to have these lines not fall perfectly on what you painted. I think it gives it sort of a fun little flair if it doesn't always line up just right. And all of the supplies that I use are linked in my Amazon store, which is listed below. So you're welcome. You can find this pen, any of the paints I use, paper, all of that if you need tips on what supplies to buy or where to get them. So there's those flowers, and then I'm going to go through and do these M flowers, and I'm going to sort of gather this whole shape as one kind of petal chunk. And then again here. Oh, and I'm gonna, around this center, I like to do sort of this scratchy motion, and then a little extra on that portion. See how it just changes the whole look of these florals. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Kind of come around. I'm going to grab that center. I don't outline the entire thing, but just kind of grabbing, making those scratchy marks. Trying to mimic what I've done with the brush. I feel like this process can be really fun and meditative if you let it be. Okay, so now it's really changing the vibe of our whole painting. I'm just going to keep going. Generally, once I start outlining, I will outline most of what's in the painting because it brings a heaviness that sometimes can feel out of whack if you don't do other things. So I'm going to do some of these little blobby shapes. I'm just sort of making up the shapes as I go, trying to outline really loosely so I'm not making really stark shapes, just adding a little bit of something to what I've laid down. I'm going to outline these leaves. Again, I just outline I go around the perimeter and then a little line up through the middle, kind of a little back and forth up through the middle. I'm going to do that over here. And okay, now I've got some of my little flowers that I'm going to do. So for these ones, I'm just going to sort of mimic the shape that I painted, kind of grabbing some of this texture. I like to make my shapes look kind of playful. So I try to be loose with my pen, get lots of wiggles in there. Kind of that scratchy, sketchy feeling helps it feel more alive. And then I'm going to go over these little zigzag flowers, kind of the same way I did on these, where I'm capturing chunks of petal at a time. And then just a little scribble in the middle of these. A little scribble. And again, this step is optional. It definitely changes the vibe of a painting, and so don't feel like you have to do it, but it is really fun to add. Okay, I'm not going to do every bit. I'm going to do just a couple little kind of lines to amplify some of these marks. Oops, I didn't do these ones. And then in here, I think it can be fun to just do a few little scribbles. If you can see here, just little, almost giving the impression of some bits of leaves and whatnot in there. And then over here, Okay. Another thing I like to do when I'm doing pen work is sometimes I will add additional marks with my pen that are not part of what I painted. One of my favorite things to do is add some little bubbles like this. Do kind of a variety of little circles. I think they create such a fun, whimsical element. All right, now I feel like this is ready to be chopped up. Even if it feels pretty right now, it almost always looks better when it's chopped up. So I'm going to show you how I cut up my bookmarks. And there are a few tricks to helping get good bookmarks out of this. So for this, sometimes I like to visualize beforehand, like, okay, what's going to make a cute bookmark? I find if you chop through the center of a flower, it helps it look complete on both sides, if you can see that. And so that's one of the things I like to try. So the first thing I'm going to do is just chop this paper in half about. So I'm going to try and chop this flower right here in half. We did it. We took the first bite of our painting. Now I'm going to and so I like to sort of start with the main portions I'm cutting up first. So I'm going to cut this flower here right in half. Ooh, look how fun. And now it's a little bit wide for a bookmark. And so I will just chop. I like them to be around 2 to 2.5 inches. So look at that. Look how cute they are. Okay, there's one. We're going to keep going. So now I have this chunk and I can go this way or I can go this way. I think I'm going to go this way. So I'm going to cut just so I have enough. Kind of looking at the chunk I have here. I'll go like this. There's my pretty little bookmark. And we're going to keep going. This one. I'm going to grab about right here. There's that guy. And this one, you can throw it away, you can keep it. Maybe I'll add some more stuff on there. And then I'm going to decide how to chop up this one. So these ones, sometimes I will turn them upside down. They tend to work that way. And I'm going to start, we're just going to go right here. So again, a little bit wide, and I'm just going to trim off so it's not too wide. There's one. Going to get a nice vibrant chunk right here. And I'm paying attention to how wide this portion is on the end. And then I think we can get 2 more out of this. We're lucky. Okay, that one and this one. So those are the chunks that I've cut. And now that I know what my bookmarks look like, I can add additional things to them if they feel a little bit empty or if they need to be tweaked at all. So, before these bookmarks, they were facing the other way when I painted initially. So this flower looks a little bit upside down because I painted these stamens pointing this way. So I am going to paint some going the other way as well, so they kind of go all the way around, so that, because as a bookmark I think it works better this orientation. So I'm just going to get that same Payne's gray color and make some marks this way. And then it helps it so it doesn't look like it's upside down so much. And I like having some white space up on top of my bookmarks. If you don't, that's okay. I might actually, maybe we could do some, like a stem in there. So I'm going to come right here. I'm going to mix up some more of this green color. I'm going to come way up here with a really skinny little stem and make skinny little leaves. I feel like that will work for this bookmark. Skinny little leaves. And I'm just painting them as if they're kind of going behind some of this existing greenery. So I'll paint little portions of leaves over here. Okay, I think that helps fill up that bookmark a little better. I'm just going to drop a little extra color there so that the base of these leaves is nice and dark. Okay. Okay, something else kind of fun that you can do is add some marks that are not floral, but that add a little splash of color. So this would be a good example of that. The little marks right here are not really anything, but they add a little something to the painting. So they're a great way to add some color. So if I come to this painting and I just come up here and I make some little dashes with my paintbrush, kind of like abstract mark making. It doesn't, doesn't take much. I'm just going to go over it with a little bit of a darker tone. Mix it up a bit. It helps to add a little pizzazz. And I'm going to make a couple little marks down in this region just to make it kind of cohesive. Okay, I also have had a lot of students who will add like phrases or expressions to their bookmarks, like "you are loved" or "you are beautiful" or things like that. It's kind of cute. All right, so now that I've got just rectangles, we're going to make them cute with our corner cutters and the twine. So this is a corner cutter that I like to use. It has 3 different sides. I like this one right here, the little double bump. I feel like it makes the cutest bookmarks. And to make sure I'm getting my corners, I'll just turn it over so I can see that my corner is going in. And then I just punch those out. And then I will go through and do that for all of my bookmarks. Okay. We're going to clean up our corners here. And then we are going to go through and punch the top of the bookmarks. So I like this punch. It is a little bit smaller than your average punch. I just feel like it makes a cuter hole. It's not a big deal. A regular punch will work just fine, but I do like this one. So I will go through and just make some holes. I try to get it centered. And then I have somewhere to put my twine. Right now for my twine, I am just going to unroll a little bit of that and snip it. And then the way I loop it in is I will double it over and pinch the top here, pinch that middle portion and stuff it through the little hole I made, create a loop, and then I will put that double twine through the loop and then pull it. Okay, and there is my little twine. These are a little long for me. I'm going to trim those a bit. And there is a finished bookmark. Isn't that fun? This one, I feel like it's a little empty. I'm going to add some little bubbles on this one. Okay, and now we can do the same thing to the rest of them. Okay. There we have it. There is the final product of all of our watercolor bookmarks. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to drop any questions that you have down below. Make sure you subscribe and follow my channel, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.